All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome again to How Do We Go Forward, How Do We Go Back, a series of conversations about returning to academia in the fall. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to have Cooper Albright with us and Lawrence Jackson, who are going to be talking about leadership. I'm going to read short bios. Longer ones are on the Facebook event, and they'll be on the archive of this talk, which will be up on the Headtail Connection within the week. So Lawrence Jackson is the Associate Chair, Associate Professor, and Director of Graduate Studies in Dance at the University of Alabama, where he teaches jazz, contemporary dance history, research methods, and African American dance studies. And Cooper Albright is a dancer and a scholar and a 2019 to 2020 Guggenheim Fellow, and is Professor and Chair of the Department of Dance at Oberlin College, where she teaches a variety of courses that seek to engage students in both practices and theories of the body. And I'm going to start off with, what is it like to be in a position of leadership right now for you both?
And you want to start?
No, you can start.
Okay. Well, this is my first year as the chair, and I have to say it has been a really interesting first year with everything that's occurred within our environment and everything that's happening around us culturally. I have to say that one of the things that I've thought about it when I think about the challenges that I face is I'm like, when I want to back away from them, is that I think, you know, we're really encouraging our students to be creative thinkers and to be, and to really learn how to think outside the box and use, and problem solving and things of that nature. And so when I get to those places where, or those times where I feel as though, oh, Lawrence, this is like too much, pass that on to someone else. I reflect back to what it is that I'm asking of my students, and it forces me to actually think a little bit more critically about whatever challenges are facing are before me at the time. And I have to say that being in an administrative role and transitioning from just being just a professor where you're really kind of focused on your research, your pedagogy, creative endeavors, and then shifting into a place where now you're in a managerial role and an administrative role, in addition to all of those other things. It's a very interesting transition, because I feel like you go from now not necessarily being more focused on you, but you're more focused on a greater vision and a greater mission. And so I think for me, what I've learned in my first year of being in leadership is that to be a lot more selfless and to listen about 80% of the time and speak 20% of the time. Because that lesson has taught me is that I certainly don't have all the answers, and I certainly like to listen to what other people are saying and to get multiple perspectives. And I think in this role, I have learned that collectively, problems get solved a lot better when you can listen to a plethora of voices and then make the best decisions based off those voices. I love leading in a very democratic kind of a way of really like gauging what everybody's opinions are on things, and then deciphering when to make executive decisions. And I think that like those are some of the more challenging times when you're like, well, do I listen to what everybody's saying, or do I just make the executive decision and go with my gut? So so those are some of the I think some of the more some of the issues that or some of the things that immediately arise when I think about this year in leadership and thinking about looking forward into more years of leadership. So it was a really long answer.
We have time. So I have lots of things to say, because unlike you, I've been doing this for a while now. But I do think that there is, I think that there's a kind of, it's almost like a developmental thing, because you end up being chair or doing administrative work for an organization or something like that usually it's after you get tenure. And I think that there's a moment where, you know, first, like, in undergraduate school, you're just trying to figure out who you are, you know, and then when you go to graduate school, you end up saying, okay, so there's this thing called the field of dance, and I want to be involved, and what are all the different elements, and what areas most intrigue me. And then, as you said, you become a professor and you work really hard to like try to get your scholarship and make a name for yourself in this area that you're interested in, and, you know, kind of things. But then at a certain point, I do think that you start to think really structurally about, you know, what is this field? What are the issues that we're dealing with? And particularly as a dance department in academia, right? Because we're also really trying to convey, you know, I think of it as like we're facing in two different directions. One of them is we're trying to support our department and make sure that everybody gets, you know, the guest teachers they want to bring in, and the opportunities and the performance conditions that are right for their work, et cetera, et cetera. And then you're also facing outward towards the university, and you're trying to articulate, at least I feel as if I do all the time, why dance is a really important part of an academic institution, right? So I feel as if there's, you know, there are kind of these ways in which I feel like very different people when I'm in a department meeting. And I agree with you, Lawrence, like it's about, you know, making sure everybody has what they need. Very often, you know, it's not that hard to come to consensus, at least about many of the day-to-day items. Sometimes conversations are a little more complicated, but, you know, that to me, that's the kind of easy stuff of like, this is the agenda, we have to tick it off kind of thing. It gets a little more complicated when your college turns around in the middle of a summer and says, guess what, guys, we're going to have 3 semesters instead of 2. And so let's figure out how to make sure, you know, and certain students aren't going to be here. So all those juniors in that class that you were offering in the fall can't offer it in the fall. You know? So there's all of that extra Zoom time in, you know, in department meetings. And so there's that. But there's also, for me, this whole, I mean, I actually, because I was on leave last year, so I haven't taught on Zoom. Although I'm very skeptical about screens and watching screens. I'm less skeptical about audio. And I think that if I were required to teach remotely, that's what I'll do. I'll do an audio class so people don't have to be too worried about looking at their screen or following something, but they can follow my words in whatever space they're in. And the reason I think about that a lot is that one of, you know, it strikes me that even now, more than ever, people are less and less involved in their own three-dimensionality. That there's a lot of, you know, kind of two-dimensional activity. And what does that do to our brains? What does that do to our reflexes? I feel as if just personally as a faculty member, since I teach contact improvisation, like that's my big deal, right? And guess what? We're not doing contact. So I replaced that with a class called Improvisation in Dance and Mind. And I'm looking forward to kind of stretching myself and stretching the students. And I really want to work a lot with improvising with text and language, because I think that's like the new area that my department hasn't really explored and we could explore. It's like a new frontier in a way for me and a lot of the students, and also the faculty don't do a lot of that. Of course, I'm writing a book on Simone Forti, who does. So, you know, it's part of that kind of research. So stretching and being patient, you know, both with the students and the faculty as we kind of try to reimagine what we're going to do. Some of it is our department, like we can do certain things. Some of it comes from the college. You know, the college has decided not to do any public performances this fall. So we you know, we can do kind of online stuff, but we can't really do, I mean, I had imagined, we have a big, beautiful space, as Sven will testify. And I had imagined, you know, seating in the round with, you know, I just imagine still having that connection with an audience. And I wonder what happens when a group of dancers' only experience is always through this medium, you know, that kind of experience of performing presence.
Lawrence, what are your thoughts on that?
What?
I was just going to say, what are your thoughts on that, Lawrence? Because we have also cancelled public performances down here for this semester. What curriculum changes are you thinking about for the fall?
Well, in regard to performances, we obviously we're having a virtual season, I'm sure, as most people are, if they're choosing to have a season at all. And so what initially some ideas that I was exploring was doing site-specific work, you know, outside or things of that nature. But then, as Anne was saying, when the universities comes in and they generate a new set of policies, which make it a little bit more challenging for you to go with these ideas that you've imagined, then you have to scrap those. So that's kind of been like the whole narrative since we broke in March, in terms of like each time you take 2 steps forward and you're thinking, the university takes you 3 steps back, and you're having to always start at square one to try to bring forth an educational experience that is rewarding for students who are coming back into this new way of existing on a university campus. And so some of the curricular things that we have implemented, or that we've begun to implement, is that obviously our university is making us return to campus in the fall. And so that was the first thing that we had to kind of contend with and figure out, you know, how do we present our classes in a safe way, because safety and risk assessment is, you know, at the top of our priority. You know, how can we bring these students in here and keep them from being exposed to this virus? Because them coming back on campus, you're never going to give them 100% safety. That's impossible. But how can we mitigate the risk and get as close to them being as safe as possible? So some of the things that we've begun to do is we measured all of our dance spaces, our studio spaces, to figure out how many students would be able to fit into the space and be able to socially distance 10 feet apart. And so we've done that, and we figured out, you know, what that number would be. And then the next step was to then now drop our class enrollment so that students can enroll beyond that number for wherever that's for each particular space. Now, some students, obviously, before we broke in the spring, returning students had already registered for the fall semester. So some of that, you know, some of those courses were already pre-registered. So the way that we basically approached that problem is that we are doing a hybridized version of presenting material in those kinds of classes, meaning that the students would be coming to the studio on Tuesday. If there's a Tuesday, Thursday class, they come in on Tuesday, not come in on Thursday, but take classes virtually on Thursday and in present face-to-face on Tuesday. And one of my concerns was that students wouldn't get the opportunity to actually have the space in their apartments to actually do the work that's happening in the studio if they were on the days that they're taking classes virtually. So we are fortunate, because everything is always, you know, the way to solve these problems, you actually have to have resources to be able to do them. And we were fortunate enough to be able to allow a student to be able to take class in a vacant studio while synchronously while their class is happening. So a student, if we have 15 students that can fit in one studio, but there's 19 enrolled, those other 4 can go to another studio and take classes at the same time. So that was kind of how we solved that little challenge. And then all of our academic classes, our dance academic classes, are going to be taught 100% virtually. So we kind of have, just for every class, we basically had to do something different. And we had to just go through our entire curriculum and figure out which class could be taught fully virtual, hybridized, or face-to-face, 100% face-to-face. And that's been tricky and it's been challenging. I go back to the whole creative thinking and trying to figure out ways to solve these problems, because for me, it's always been about giving the students a positive and our students, our faculty, and our staff an environment where they feel safe to return to. And I think that, if we can't do our jobs effectively, students can't have a very engaging educational environment if they don't feel safe in the environment that we place before them. So those have been my priorities in thinking about this whole return to campus. And so those are some of the things that we've been doing. And as I said, in terms of concerts, we figured out the fall. Spring is still up on the discussion table. So.
I have a question for you, Lawrence. Why did you choose to have all the academic classes virtually?
Because a lot of those classes had also been pre-registered for it, because they're mostly our upper division classes. And those classes typically have anywhere between 30 or more students. And the spaces that those those classes are held in will only accommodate about 8 to 10 students. So we kind of didn't have a choice in that regard. So, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I think, as I said, I haven't really worked with a lot of the virtual teaching myself. I think the students or the faculty that were around in the spring, some of them had to change their courses. We ended up kind of, it was right about spring break for us that we switched. And so a lot of faculty switched from courses, like a repertory class where they can't really continue with that and the concerts canceled anyway, to other courses that they could teach. But I know that a number of faculty were just so exhausted by the end of the semester because there was so much, it was so difficult to both teach and also see what the students are doing on the computer, and try to get a sense of that. I will see, we're coming back in person because we have really big spaces and because we've switched from 2 semesters to 3, we have, fortunately the possibility of, one staircase goes up, one staircase goes down. We've been able to schedule. Also, the university set up a situation where you could teach classes in times when they hadn't let you teach classes before, in sports times and things like that. So we are able to teach without too much kind of interaction between people in the lobby and dressing room and things like that. But I feel really strongly that the students need in-person instruction, that they're just hungry for it. I mean, and that they want to be present in a space with other people and feel that that's part of their learning. And so figuring out how to do it safely, but also it strikes me that a lot of the rhetoric around COVID-19 and social distancing has made people really nervous about being with other people. And that's a psychic thing, it's not just a medical thing. It's like a mindset. So I've taken to saying things like, we're going to be physically distanced, but not emotionally distanced. Like how can you cross over that space and still be really present for the people that you're teaching? And similarly, how can they bring themselves fully to the space and be present? And kind of acknowledging those little traces of fear about contagion and all of those things, I think is going to be really important for people to come fully present for whatever class we're teaching, for however long we're going to be able to teach it, you know, because as so many people have said, you've got that 18 to 22-year-old crowd, you know, who's going to be policing them at 2 o'clock in the morning anyway, you know, so we'll see.
I'm going to jump in for a second because we are running close to time, but I want to pose a final thought to both of you before we go to questions, which is that I'm hearing you both talk a lot about various levels and spectrums of need. People need emotional wellness, they need pedagogical wellness, they need like logistical care. So there's a lot of different kinds of care that we're trying to give our students, and artistic care, and kind of like they need to have people around them. So I guess because you are people who have to care for yourselves, and you have, as Anne said, care in both directions. What's coming out most strongly for you as the thing that you need to achieve your vision for the fall? And what kinds of care and what kinds of structures do we need in place?
That's a challenging question. I think because for the whole, I think the whole theme around everything is uncertainty. And so some days I think I need this based off the information I have that day. And then the next week, I feel like I need this, which is completely counter to what I needed the week prior. So it's so ever evolving, which is why for me, it makes it kind of a challenging question. But I think in terms of what I feel like I need today, I need clarity about from the powers above me about resources, because resources are always like, you know, there's so many things that I think, so many challenges I think we can overcome given the challenges we're facing with returning to campus amidst this pandemic, that yeah, I have these wonderful ideas about how we approach them, but I don't necessarily know if I have the resources to be able to get those ideas realized. And so that's kind of what I need. And then I think once I know that, it kind of will trickle down and kind of solve those other areas of wellness that I feel that I need. I think for me, my mind is constantly turning and turning and turning, trying to think about how to solve so many different issues simultaneously. But the central theme is such that still that I don't necessarily know, because I don't necessarily have all of the tools that I need. And I don't necessarily know that the problem that I have today, a different set of problems might come tomorrow. No, they will come, given the kind of the trajectory and the narrative. This whole thing has just been everything. Every week there's a new set of issues that we have to figure out. Our institution just told us a couple of weeks ago that made the final decision that we were returning to campus. So prior to that, we were making plans to work in a virtual way for the semester. So then we had to go and reconfigure all of those ideas. So everything, and then you have to even think about the what ifs, what if we start and then we end up leaving and going back into the virtual world. How do I solve that? And should I be thinking about that right now? What's the plan B for that? So it's just uncertainty, and it's so frustrating and yet so intriguing, because your mind is consistently working in a creative, problem solving, critical thinking kind of way, but it does get exhausting.
Yeah. So I ditto everything Lawrence said. But I would say specifically, you know, Fen, you're using this term care, and I feel as if we need a new ethos of care. I feel as if the term care and self-care in America right now has become this thing that draws us into ourselves. And I feel as if it's really important to imagine the possibility of caring for yourself while in the midst of dealing with other people and caring for other people in the world. That this idea that we have to kind of pull back to care for ourselves and shut down and, you know, then binge watch something on Netflix for, 24 hours or something like that. It's just not a useful for me right now because of the uncertainty, because of the fear, because of the anxiety that so many things up in the air cause. I think we have to recognize that and push against that so we don't lose our energy by holding on to that anxiety. Like, I'm really, really aware, people are like, wow, you're, 60 years old and aren't you nervous about going, and I just kind of want to be like, I actually need to just be present until I'm sick, and then I won't be present anymore. Like it's like, that's just what's going to have to happen, and I'm going to be safe. And I am, very kind of rigorous about masking and things like that, but I can't walk into a space and try to teach people if I'm kind of holding myself back in some way. So yeah, I think we need to find a way to care for one another, like really to care for one another, even if we can't touch one another. And also I would say, yes, okay, so preparing, to be able to teach in person and recognizing a month later we could shut down the campus again. So one of the things I'm going to do this summer is I'm going to record How to Land, which is my most recent book, which deals with anxiety and disorientation and chaos and various things, so that I have, audio recordings that the students can work with if we're end up being remote. And yeah, I think I'm going to try this audio thing because I kind of feel like I think it's an exchange of voice that gives me more presence than pictures that I have to try, to like put my glasses on and see who's out there and, that kind of stuff. I mean, I just feel as if I'm not at my best there, but if I can be embodied and vocal, then there's something there that has some substance that people can use. And also because the voice is three-dimensional, so you don't have to just be sitting down in one way. I mean, the amount of Zoom meetings I've had to have is just exhausting to me because most of the time I'm sitting down for them.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, Lawrence. Can I ask a question, Finn?
Yes. We started a little late, so absolutely.
So this has come up in our department, and I've started to draft something. Are you, Lawrence, thinking about doing a statement about the kind of police brutality, political climate as part of the department, and where would that statement be? I mean, I'm drafting a welcome back students letter that has multiple things going on, but it is something that I'm thinking of addressing and how to address it in a way that is substantive and, thoughtful. I mean, certainly Oberlin has a really strong history in the dance department. I mean, people are like, blah, blah, blah. Well, ballet isn't, I'm like, hell, we didn't even teach ballet. You know what I mean? We have way more African diasporic forms available than contemporary dance forms. So it's not so much that, it's not like mea culpa, but it is really saying to people, because I think it's really important. One of our mottos is, we don't just dance in the studio, we dance in the world, right? So really acknowledging that as part of the work we're doing in dance.
Yeah, we actually...
Lawrence, I really want your answer to this question. What I'm going to suggest is folks who have questions, pop them in the chat, and then if you start to run to an end, we can move to some of those questions. And if there aren't questions, we can stay on this topic, which is really super important. Does that sound like a good plan?
Sounds great.
Great, hit it.
Yeah, so we're a department of theater and dance, and so we actually, I felt it was very important for us to release a statement in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. Our department historically has never statements as it relates to social or political happenings in society, and but in this particular case, in thinking about our alumni, our current faculty, our students, I wanted to definitely voice our stance on that. And when I crafted the statement, I also felt it was important that we take accountability for our shortcomings as it relates to moving the agenda for Black Lives Matter forward. And so within our statement, I definitely listed some of the things that we should work on within our own selves, and particularly within our own department. And I felt like it was very therapeutic and cathartic for many of our for our department, because it forced us to look inward. So it forced us to look inward and think about, you know, our curriculum, our the work that we're producing, the work that we're not producing, the support that we're giving our students of color or not giving our students of color. What are we doing? What are our shortcomings within the discipline, within each of our disciplines, between theater and dance? And so I felt like it was very important for that to happen. And so we did it. I think we released our statement about a month ago. And we posted it on our social media platforms, not on our website. Because posting things on our website has to run through a series of chains.
Right.
And given the urgency of everything, I felt like we needed to get it out there without having to go through all of the bureaucracy. So,
cool.
Yeah. So, questions, audience people. Should I read the questions, or are you gonna?
No, sorry, I'm gonna invite people to come back and join us and to turn on their cameras and microphones if they want to. And we'll start with Sydney's question, perhaps while everyone gets their tech sorted out. If you're in charge of the decisions, what would you want your fall to look like? And if that looks different from what the university is asking you to do you feel like you have the power to resist?
Ooh. Okay, I'll try that one. Quite honestly, I would want my falls to look virtual. I would want the fall. And thinking about where we are in terms of our response to this pandemic, I don't think that we should be returning to class in person. I am concerned about the health and well-being of everyone, particularly the staff of the universities, because they're the ones who I think get the brunt of everything that's happening, and they're the ones that who are putting themselves mostly at risk more than any of us. And that really it bothers me spiritually, and it makes me very concerned about the lack of empathy that people who are in charge are experiencing. And so I would try to figure out a virtual way to return. And I totally agree with Anne. I think students, especially within dance, I think it's wholly important for them to be in the space with the instructors. And I definitely value that. And even though, as we spoke earlier, I've been getting more accustomed to teaching on Zoom, but my preference by far is being in the studio with my students. Because there's energy that is recycled between, or that occurs between the people in the room. I feed off my students, they feed off me, they feed off each other, and Zoom is great, but to me, that important element gets lost in the virtual world. And so although I would want to be there, like in person with my students, my concern for everyone's health and well-being supersedes my desire to want to be in the space with the students.
So Oberlin's a slightly different situation in the sense that if, you know, we're a private college, students pay there's a lot of financial aid, but students generally pay quite a bit of money to come here. If the students aren't going to come on campus, they're not going to come to college. I mean, they're not going to, you know, the experience is of a residential 4-year liberal arts college. So I think that became kind of clear. And for a while it was, you know, will we just shut the college for a year and put everybody on furlough? I mean, I totally hear what you're saying about the staff. And we have, you know, bought like miles of plexiglass and now have plexiglass, you know, in all of the different places to protect the staff who have to deal with people. But I think, I mean, maybe I feel as if we could even just get a little time together that you could be together and then go remote is a very different situation than starting a new class remotely and trying to understand how to make something happen within a group of people that have had no interaction with each other and have had no kind of community built. So I'm personally happy to be going back in person. I think we have to be very rigorous and careful about health issues. But I remember that what I call the Heine flu, the H1N1 time, you know, where people were really, really nervous about that. And there were a lot of discussions in the administration about, you know, distancing and things like that. So sometimes I question whether there's a certain amount of, you know, kind of just, yeah, not so much panic, but extra anxiety around certain things. I don't know for sure. I know, you know, that we need to be rigorous about coming together. I don't feel personally as if, I mean, I feel as, you know, I mean, I'm kind of an aging punk rocker, you know what I mean? Like, I haven't done things by the book in a long time. So, but I'm not sure I feel as if I could resist the university about certain things because their guidance is so much based on litigation. You know, like litigation is the thing now for all of the administrators. And so I'm not sure, you know, I can resist in subtle ways or in like within our space ways, but I couldn't say like, oh, we're going to be in person if the university says we're going to be remote, or I couldn't say we're going to have performances, you know, and sell tickets to the public if the university is saying, no, you can't. So there's certain places you can maybe mobilize some showings for an invited group of people that are distanced, but there are other things that I don't feel as if it's worth my while trying to resist or subvert because I'll just be, you know, it just won't be worth it. You have to be strategic about what parts you're going to resist, put it that way.
Definitely.
Right. We have two questions, both of which are to do with social justice. So I'll read them together, if that's okay with Christy J and Amy, and see how they track with you. Christy J. Wells says, you've expressed, and many of us feel the same, a strong preference for or a need for in-person interaction. There are, however, some ways in which online options can increase accessibility for people with disabilities, for students who cannot get to campus for whatever reason. Could our attachment to in-person instruction as a default mode be a hindrance in designing the best virtual or digital options we can? And how are you both navigating that tension? And then Amy Glock asks, my question is along the same lines as the discussion on the Black Lives Matter statement. How will your departments include social justice, including the demand to overthrow white supremacy and white supremacist systems, beside just a statement, which is a great start? How will you incorporate this into your curriculum and pedagogy if it's not already there? Questions.
I'll start with Amy's question because the first one I think I need a little bit more time to sit with that one, which I think Amy's a great question. So many departments are creating statements, but the statements mean nothing if there's inactivity behind them. And I think, as I said about our statement earlier, is that I didn't want to produce just a blanket statement that, you know, just seemed to be something that people were doing because it was popular at the time, but rather like really looking inward and figuring out how we can make changes. I think the thing that this whole cultural war has for me caused us to do is really look inward and figure out, you know, where we lack in those areas of moving the social justice bar forward, and where we lack not just personally but also in our professional lives. And so in thinking about our department, I can speak from the dance side. As I said, we're a theater and dance department. On the dance side, we have, you know, admittedly created a very Eurocentric curriculum within our program, as many dance programs have across the country. And the way I feel like our curriculum and even some of our practices in terms of the work that we produce, the way that we cast students into our works, our auditions, and all of those kinds of things lack inclusivity. And so it's really forced me as the leader of my area to bring my faculty together and say, okay, let's look at ourselves and look at honestly what we're doing and figure out how we can really make a change and how we can really make our program feel inclusive for people beyond just race. So in thinking about that, that's why I said I really wanted to write a statement that was about accountability. This isn't a statement that's just saying, you know, oh, we're all for Black Lives Matter movement and we feel blah, 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 but we're not doing anything ourselves other than making a well-crafted statement. So, so some of the ways that we're moving is to look at the way we audition students, to look at our dress codes, to look at the work that we're presenting, the different guest artists that we bring to present the work, looking at our curriculum and redefining what we're actually looking for in a dancer beyond just being a strong ballet dancer or a strong modern dancer, looking at the way we think about what is considered great technique, and all of those things. It's really, we have a lot of work to do. And I think that a lot of our work spawns from the institutionalized racism that has filtered into dance for a while. I was conditioned to think that great technique was, you know, if you were a really good ballet dancer, you know, and so I'm having to undo what I see. And I know that a ton of people within the dance world are having to undo the same thing. So we actually, as a faculty, just met a week ago to really kind of just think about some of our practices. And even in addition to our practices, I feel like once we've gotten to a place where we feel as though we have moved the ball a little bit forward, then how can we use our art form to make socio-political statements with the art itself? And so that would be the next phase that we're considering. So.
So at Oberlin, so maybe Oberlin's like a very different place than Alabama in some ways, in that I don't think we've ever really put a huge, I mean, we're not a pre-professional school. We're not trying to create dancers for companies. And that has allowed us to have a very different take on what it means to become a virtuosic dancer. So for us, it's much more about finding your individual voice, and we support a lot of choreographic work. So, and for many, many years, we've been decentering our curriculum. I mean, I've had these discussions the whole time I've been at Oberlin, and, you know, very clearly, like, no, modern dance is not a universal technique. No, ballet is not the beginning and the end of dance training. We have had a major where you didn't have to take ballet or modern for probably half a dozen years. I mean, you can do the entire major by taking samba, capoeira, African dance, dances of the diaspora. So, you know, I think we're maybe have moved through. That doesn't mean there's not a lot of systemic racism still operating in the university and in our department, but we've certainly had those kinds of conversations for a very long time. And the other thing is, and this kind of speaks to I'll speak to the accessibility issue in a second. But the other thing that really happens at Oberlin is we have very active student dance clubs, which the department supports. So we have not one, not two, but 3 different kinds of hip hop groups, you know, that all focus, like we have, you know, a femme-centric African-American hip hop group called And What. We have a multi-gendered, multi-international kind of K-pop, that form of some hip hop stuff going on. That's one group. Then we have another group that has kind of, you know, a different form, maybe more Latinx focus. So, you know, we have all these different groups, and by supporting them, we already kind of take a step back in terms of the department's offerings are available, but they're one aspect of many different things. So we have a capoeira club, we have you know, so we have all these things that the students do too, and that's one way to really decenter the classes as the only thing that we're kind of offering in terms of dance. I think this idea that, you know, Google is free, that things on the internet provide accessibility is very, for me, kind of one-sided. I would say, what do you mean by accessibility? Do you mean that people can actually get on that material? Is that really what accessibility is? Or is that a kind of, for me, a gloss about accessibility? And it feels to me as if what we want is a kind of universal education that allows everyone to have access financially, physically, emotionally, you know, all of those things, culturally, but to have the access to the best education and not thinking, I mean, there are so many things now on Zoom. Like, you can access so many different conferences on Zoom. But really, is that making those conferences as rich and juicy and as full as the kind of conferences that happen in person? I don't know, but the people I speak with say, like, oh my God, I couldn't handle another 6 hours on, you know, the computer while people talk. And, you know, so I would question whether having remote instruction is necessarily more accessible, or more accessible in the richest possible kind of educational venture.
Yeah, I would say, you know, every time change comes, I think our instinct is to kind of like back away from it, or to be so uncomfortable by it that we want to run back to what we're accustomed to and what feels much more comfortable for us. And so I think that we have to be humble about, you know, learning something new and admitting that, you know, this feels uncomfortable. So where I am is that I'm admitting that Zoom feels eerily uncomfortable for me, and I would prefer to be in person. In terms of accessibility, yes, it does have its advantages, and I think that, you know, one of the things I think about is, what if this is our new norm? And what if we will never be, you know, I mean, hopefully that's never not the case, but what if we don't go back to ever having the opportunity to be in person? Then how do we adapt in this space and be comfortable within this space? And so in that regard, it forces me to try to open myself up a little bit more to this virtual world. And the more and more I open myself up to it, the more and more I get more and more comfortable with it. And so, and I am realizing that, like, I'm currently teaching at 3 different summer intensives. I'm teaching to students all over the world, well, all over the country at this moment. And I probably wouldn't have had the opportunity to do that, you know, even if I flew out to those places. There are students who, for economic reasons, wouldn't have been able to afford to take those classes because their parents may not have afforded to be able to fly them there, or they couldn't pay the registration fees for that particular workshop. So I really, in that regard, I'm really excited about the possibility of reaching out to people who wouldn't have normally had the opportunity to train with me, or I have the opportunity to even see them or interact with them in any kind of way. So in that regard, I see the benefits of virtual learning and virtual teaching. So I'm kind of here on it, and I kind of feel as though there's pros and cons to it, and I think that at some point we might have to learn to exist in this world, and I'm trying to wrap my mind around that idea.
Yeah, so since, as I said before, I haven't had to teach at Zoom because I was off last year, so who knows, maybe in 6 months I'll be like, oh, this is great. But right now I'm resisting the idea that it's the kind of totally accessible mode. I'm resisting that right now, but who knows?
Those are, I would like to just bring Allison's question into the room, but I also want to be clear on the fact that Anne and Lawrence are both volunteering their time. So the question is, what are your thoughts about the future impact of this current moment, both the virus and the interest in decolonizing the curriculum? What are your concerns, and what are the possibilities for the field of dance and for the university system structure? And that's a massive question. It's a great question, but perhaps before I turn the recording off and invite us all to kind of breathe out and chat to each other, Lawrence and Anne, you could give us a few thoughts to end on with that question in mind.
Sure. I think it's exciting, quite honestly. I think when we look historically at the Black liberation movement, and thinking about the many times that we have tried to advance equality and equity and inclusion within this country, I think that this time feels awfully different than a lot of the other times. I actually feel like the ball is moving a little bit further than it has in the past. And as a person of color, I'm cautiously very optimistic about where we are in that regard. There's so much more work to do. But I think that in this particular regard, it's forcing all of us to, again, look within ourselves, look within our professions, and change. And I think that what feels different than the past is that everybody seems to be a little bit more open to shifting a little bit, and also accepting where they have defaults in their thinking about a lot of things, which then sparks change. So that's really, really exciting. And and again, like I said in regards to the last question, I don't particularly care for Zoom at the moment, but what's exciting about it is like, wow, like this is another medium and another platform that we can use to reach out to people through our discipline. This is another way that we can share dance with the world. And that's incredibly exciting, and something that in my lifetime, I would have never thought that this would be a medium which we could use to express ourselves and to, and to kind of get our ideas and our thoughts and connecting with people from all over the world. So it's really exciting. And, in the midst of everything that's going on, it's helpful and to find a little bit of silver lining and so much that's happening in our world right now. And so those are the things that I think are hugely exciting in the midst of all of this.
Well, okay, so Oberlin it was a surfacing area for the Underground Railroad. So we've celebrated Juneteenth, you know, all the time I've been here for 100 years. And so one of the things that we're doing in the summer, since we're having a summer program, is that we're creating a kind of Dances of the Diaspora program that we're going to include the community in. So we have this big town square, and we can teach when the weather's good on the town square, and that way we can actually include a lot of members of the community as well as the college students. So we're really looking forward to kind of, you know, programming as a way to really to focus the energy there. I mean, politically, it's a very, I agree with you, Lawrence, it's a pretty exciting moment. I'll tell you, the woman across the street from me had a Trump sign in 2016, and now she has a whole series of handmade signs saying, I live in a country where white police kill Black people. Aren't you outraged yet? This, you know, like, just like all of this stuff. Look, I'm getting goosebumps. Look at this, people. I've got goosebumps on my arms. I mean, this is a moment, and y'all need to vote. This is a moment that, you know, I think could have great significance. And I think the pandemic, in some ways, and, you know, Trump's inability to deal with it kind of did help this moment. This really galvanized this moment. So I mean, politically, I feel pretty excited. In terms of where we're gonna go, I mean, I'm still planning a 50th anniversary of Contact in 2022. I mean, like, I'm still really working on this idea that people will be able to do Contact in 2 years. If they can't, we'll find another way to do it. And as you said, you know, it will force us to become creative, and it'll force us to figure out how to make that happen. I'm just really fucking old fashioned when it comes to wanting to be with people. Like, I really, you know, the experience of teaching a workshop and traveling to teach a workshop is very different from spending an hour on a Zoom, or even, you know, 3 hours on a Zoom event. So, I mean, I don't know, maybe, I think I'm kind of like really deep down inside a four-legged creature, and I work with smell and kind of other forms as opposed to just visual. So that's what I'm missing. I'm missing that, like, the enzymes in people's sweat, you know, like, I'm missing that bodily presence. And it makes me a little nervous in terms of the role of performance and dance and live bodies, that we would create a situation where they were disposable.
All right. I was about to say, what an optimistic note to end on, and then you kind of took a hard swing right at the end there. But that, yeah, I thank you. Firstly, can we thank Anne and Lawrence so much for being here and for talking so eloquently and powerfully about what's going on. I am going to invite you to turn the recording off and just breathe out, but first I just want to do a little plug for next week's talk. We had administration last week, we had leadership this week. We're taking a little journey because next week we have Dr. Molly Faulkner and Julia K. Gleick, who are going to come in and talk about institutional exhaustion. Which I'm also very excited to hear about, and I really hope that you will join us. But for now, again, thank all of you for being here. Thank you to Anne and Lawrence. I am going to turn off the camera now.
Thank you.